So welcome to another episode of the Rediscovery Channel, where each time we look at a different topic from history that the other person may or may not have heard of. I'm here with my good friend Ivor. My name is Stilgar, and this week I want to talk to you about bat bombs. If I mention bat bombs, do you anything comes to mind what I might be talking about?
So, two things come to mind, and they're both probably wrong. Well, one thing I think about is like bats living in the cave and making huge piles of guano. And the other is,
Yeah.
of course, Batman and Robin, where they had like a bat everything, like a bat spray shark repellent. And I'm sure like neither of these things is relevant. I'm guessing.
No.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no. So what I want to talk about is actually this is a literal bomb made out of bats, and this is an American invention
Oh.
that was invented in the year 1942 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. military was looking for innovative ways to strike back at Japan. And Dr. Little S. Adams, who was a dental surgeon from Pennsylvania, who liked to think outside of the box a little bit. He was a guy who was a bit of a dreamer, and he had a love for bats. He had recently visited Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, where he'd seen millions of Mexican free-tailed bats swarming in massive colonies, and that's when he got some inspiration. He thought, what if we could turn these bats into living weapons? And the idea was actually quite simple. He wanted to attach tiny incendiary bombs to bats, drop them from planes over Japanese cities, and then let them roost in wooden buildings. And as you know, Japan at the time was mostly wooden buildings. The bombs would then ignite, and they would spark fires across enemy territory. Japanese cities were, it's not just wood; it's wood and paper. So they were actually perfect tinder boxes. Was the idea. And the idea was, or the thought was that this way he could wreak havoc across large areas in Japanese cities without risking American pilots, because you'd only have to drop one or two of them. So yeah, he pitched the idea to the White House, and it somehow it caught the attention of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who passed it along to the military, and the military decided to give it a go and to try it out. So they dubbed it Project X-Ray.
X-ray?
And they started, yeah.
What does it have to do with X-rays?
I'm not sure actually where that name came from. That's a good question. But they started a top secret operation overseen by the Army Air Forces. They enlisted Adams along with a team of scientists and engineers, and even a Hollywood animal trainer named Jack Hoover, with the goal of turning these bats into kamikaze like fire starters. And they chose the Mexican free-tailed bats because they were small and they were plentiful, and they were able to carry quite the amount of weight, enough for a 1 ounce incendiary bomb. These bombs were designed by a chemist named Louis Fieser, who happened to also invent napalm, by the way. They were tiny but deadly, and packed with a chemical mix that could ignite after a time delay. So the army, they started rounding up thousands of bats from caves in the Southwest using nets and traps. And then they developed a special container, a bomb-shaped canister that could hold over 1,000 bats. And each was tucked into its own little cardboard cell, like it was kind of like a honeycomb. And then the plan was to drop these canisters from B-25 bombers at dawn, when bats naturally seek a place to roost. And then a parachute would slow the canister's fall, and at a certain altitude it would pop open and releasing the cloud of bats to scatter across a 20 to 40 mile radius. And then, of course, then it would just be there would be a tiny time bomb on it, on all those tiny bats. They'd find little cozy spots in attics or other places of the house, and fires would erupt all over the place, overwhelming Japan's defenses. So they started testing in 1943 at Muroc Lake, California, a remote desert site, and it turned out that it was basically a disaster. Bats are completely unpredictable, and during one test, some escaped and roosted under a fuel tank at a nearby airbase. So their bombs went off, and they accidentally set the base on fire. Another time, bats were released too early and just fell asleep mid-flight, plummeting to the ground. The team had to figure out a way to keep the bats hibernating during transport, using ice to cool them down, and then making sure the bombs didn't detonate prematurely. So it was a lot of trial and error, and actually turned out they made a lot of errors. They still, despite the issues, they still believed in it, so they showed some promise. And they did tests proving that bats could carry the bombs and that the incendiaries could start fires. So, I mean, after all, they set off, their own base on fire. But by 1944, so 2 years later, the military was seriously considering deploying them. And they estimated that a single bomber carrying 100 canisters could unleash over 1 million bats. So imagine 1 million bats, potentially sparking thousands of fires in a single night. And the psychological impact alone would have been staggering. Imagine the panic of bats raining from the sky, some of them on fire, and then everything around you starting to catch on fire. It's like the beginning of a Batman movie.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't be a thing you could do to stop them, of course. But here's where the story it changes. So by mid-1944, there was another project. I guess which one? That was gaining steam.
Nuclear project.
Yeah, the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
So they started to see the bat bomb as a risky, unproven sideshow compared to the devastating power of nuclear weapons. And then the Army gave the project to the Navy, then the Marines, but then the enthusiasm kind of went away. The cost was also going up. They spent $2 million on research with all the capturing of the bats, and then it would be worth about $30 million today. Well, still chump change, I think. It's probably what we spend
compared
on
with the way they waste money now. That's like
nothing. That's $30 million in today's money. That's doesn't even get you a third of a fighter jet. But anyway, so in August 1944, Project X-ray was shelved, just as the atomic bomb was nearing its completion. The bat bomb never saw the light of combat. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was completely not necessary, but that's a different story. That they overshadowed any need for unconventional weapons like this one. But it does show you, that there's always people trying to think out the box when it comes to warfare. Um, and actually, I think this, in hindsight, this could have been very efficient, and probably could have achieved the same results without all the negative consequences of dropping two nuclear
I
bombs.
think it's too much trouble. And I mean, even if it were cost efficient, like the amount of time that would have to go in that, to gather the bats, to keep them asleep without dying, to arm them all, it's just like that's a lot of effort, man, which could probably be achieved. You could achieve that level of destruction some other way. I know, like during World War One, the Germans used to drop firebombs on England. Like I think they used their Zeppelins for that actually. I mean, you probably know more about that than I do, but they would drop these bombs that would not explode, but would burn. And they would keep burning for a while. And the Germans, they used that against the civilian population to kind of demoralize the English. And of course, like coming to World War II, pretty much all sides involved. I don't know about the Italians, but I know that like the U.S., England, and Japan would engage in like carpet bombings, where you would just blow up, you just fly over and drop a bunch of bombs. Um, I know like there's a Japanese movie called, I think it's called The Grave of Fireflies, that I actually watched when I was in college. And it shows, it doesn't even deal with the nuclear disasters, but just the stuff that the United States was doing during World War One. So evidently, before we dropped the nukes on them, we were just bombing their cities anyways. And a part of the reason for it is because surrender was not in their culture. Like they were tougher to fight than Muslims. Like Muslims, they'll do suicide attacks and everything. And of course, we had to pull out of Afghanistan, even though they're way less numerous and way less advanced technologically. But there's just so much attrition because of their ideology and because they're willing to do things that we aren't for the most part. Um, so basically, the purpose of, and I'm not getting into whether it's right or wrong, but the purpose of dropping the nukes on Japan was to save American lives, actually, so that we didn't have to manually go in and sweep through the country, because everybody would have attacked the soldiers. It would have been very tough. Um,
I don't think that it would have been the American soldiers. Honestly, the Japan would have they would have surrendered anyway because they were too afraid of the Russians.
I don't know, man.
Because it would have, let's be honest, it would have been they are neighboring countries, and if there's any country that would have done it and would have gone in there, it would have been the Soviets, and
It
they
would
would
have
have,
been
of course,
it would have
yeah.
been very tough for the Soviets too. Like during World War II, Japanese civilians would kill themselves rather than be occupied. And they would also do things like sometimes the soldiers would pretend like they were going to surrender, and when the soldiers would come and surround them, they would just pull out the pin out of the grenade, like blow themselves up. They also had suicide vests, and I mean it was a serious thing, man. I mean they were actually, imagine like Muslims at peak level jihad, but with the most advanced technology. Like, how could you even
Yeah,
fight
but
something?
I still think that they. I mean, I think because there was no need to use two bombs. First of all, I think it's also interesting that they dropped the second one on the Japan's only Catholic city,
Uh,
Nagasaki, which was not. I think it was not used to produce anything of real interest. There's also you can also look at the firebombing of Dresden.
mm,
I've been to Dresden myself. It's completely modern for the reason that the U.S. and British They used conventional planes and firebombs, and I think they killed like 30,000 people.
Right.
Basically burned them all alive. Civilians, yeah. Anyway, so and also there was an agreement that Stalin would enter the war as soon as the Nazis were defeated. And the Soviets were about, they basically, their entry into the war was a huge factor in the Japanese government's decision to surrender unconditionally. So I think those bombs were more of like a testing and a message, also to the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I've heard that theory as well, but I mean, it is a fact that
I don't buy the thing that they were gonna that you would have to send U.S. troops there. I really don't. But
don't
anyway,
know.
I think we're going off topic a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think we should study that stuff further, because I try to. It's easy to talk about this stuff in retrospect, um, and in my retrospective view is that the United States shouldn't have gotten involved in either World War One or World War Two. And one of the things
I,
that
I
kind of,
think if the United States hadn't gotten involved in World War One, World War Two would never have happened.
or it would have happened, but in a different part of the world with different players.
Yeah,
Although I guess you could say that the U.S. getting involved at all makes it a world war, because if we hadn't gotten involved, then the Western Hemisphere wouldn't have been involved. So, but what concerns me is like the stuff that happened leading up to the U.S. getting in World War One and World War Two is our government basically picked a side that they felt more sympathetic towards. And then they gave that side weapons and money, and they sanctioned the other
yeah,
side.
but the U.S. was also supporting the Germans for quite some time as well, which is interesting.
For which World
So
War?
for World War II, I believe.
Uh, I know that we sanctioned Japan very hard, like
Yeah, and that's
almost.
actually the
Oh,
one of the reasons why Pearl Harbor was inevitable.
that's right.
So
So that's why I get really concerned when I see, our government trying to get involved with Russia, and sanctioning them and giving weapons and money to the other side, because that's what they did leading up to World War One and World War Two, until the other side like eventually attacked us. And of course, Putin, I think he's like the adult in the room basically, because I'm not saying he's like a great guy, but he knows the history, and if he decided to respond directly to the United States, then probably we would be in World War III. Although I think they're trying to provoke him into striking. Of course, now we have a different government that doesn't support the war, but we still have elements in the government that do. So it worries me a lot when I see this, because it looks like history is repeating itself, and now it's more dangerous because there's all kinds of nukes. So I hope that
yeah, I mean, I
this.
think the issue with a war economy is that the same what happened to Nazi Germany is that the German economy was booming because everybody was put to work in these factories producing weapons. And you see the same thing happening now. Like you have all these companies in the West, they're all producing weapons now because supposedly Putin is going to attack Europe, which I think is bogus. But
I don't care if
yeah,
he
but
does, honestly.
well,
I'd rather.
anyway, but the thing is, like, it's a Keynesian form of stimulating the economy, but it's war-based Keynesian economics.
Keynesian.
And the issue is that at some point, like all your magazines, all your warehouses are going to be full of weapons.
Mm,
And then what do you have to do with them? You have to get rid of them because otherwise you can't produce anymore. And that's why, at some point Hitler had to invade Poland and other countries because the whole German economy was built on producing weapons. And I'm afraid we're walking into the same kind of trap again now, where we're trying to boost our own economies by building, tons of big, beautiful ships and whatnot. But at some point, you actually have to use them. Um, I even heard an anecdote, and I don't know if it's true, that after the first Gulf War, that Bush Senior instructed, or anyway, that the military or the Air Force was instructed to basically dump all their bombs and missiles into the desert, so they could start producing new ones again. So I think there's a big financial incentive then to start wars and to use, at some point to use those weapons. But I don't want to go too far off on the topic. I wanted to keep it a bit short, and I think it's interesting now with how war is changing. You see now that there's a lot of
automation,
new weapons and innovation. And I just thought it was interesting because, I mean, a bat bomb.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
if
Yeah.
they had it kind of reminds me of the drone attack that Ukraine did on Russia, where they had the drones go and attack their airplanes. I guess the drones were carrying bombs, right? Or something.
They have explosives attached to them.
So the
And
drones blew
the
up.
drones that they use are just like DJI Mavics. Those are the drones you can buy as a consumer. And then what they do, and they do this both on the Ukrainian side as well as on the Russian side, is they start like 3D printing all kinds of like extra stuff on it, so it can carry grenades, and it can or it has like optical wiring, so you can jam them. And then, but basically most of them just have an explosive. It's like a DJI Mavic explosive attached to it, and then you fly into a tank or a soldier and you explode it, and it's surprisingly effective. It's really changing the course of warfare.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
I think if they'd had drones during World War I, they would have carried out this operation, but they would have had like drones, kind of like what they did on Ukraine. They wouldn't have even thought about using animals. But the way I view it is that they were wanting to do something. The concept they were trying to fulfill was beyond the level of technology at the time. And that's kind of how I see this. Man, I never heard of this before, but it also kind of reminds me of like Samson, where he tied torches onto the tails of the foxes and then let them loose in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
same kind
Yeah.
of similar kind of idea, basic similar, like give the animals something flammable, I guess, and then let them
Yeah, and
loose.
they always like the burner ships go back to the Greeks. So they would like put a ship full of like flammable material, set it on fire, and then set it the sails full of wind and point it basically towards the direction of the enemy fleet. And
Hmm.
that has been used throughout the ages as well. But yeah, here you're entering this animal aspect. But one thing I think is about this Ukrainian action is interesting is when you start combining AI with drones, because they said that those drones were like basically operated independently without. So the AI was selecting the target, but probably they had some GPS targets where to fly to, where that's not too complex, and then most likely you use some kind of image recognition, like okay, this is a plane, and then to give it like program it or use AI to descend and explode at the right part of the plane to do maximum damage. But it made me think a little bit of this sci-fi movie called Screamers. Have you ever seen that?
Nope.
Okay.
Is it a horror
this
movie?
night, yeah, it's like a sci-fi horror-ish movie, and it's they're on this planet where they've been using all these drones which are called screamers, and they're like underground and stuff, and they scream right before they go at you. and they are using AI for them, but the AI has become self-aware. But yeah, anyway, I think we've gone off far enough off topic. Let's close down this episode with that. I think thanks Ivor for the conversation, and thanks everybody for listening. If you appreciate this content, please give us a like. And with that, I hope to see you in a future episode.
All right, good one, man.